She planned it all, and we didn't see it coming. That's what a family insider whispered the day Tracy Reiner was escorted out of the Brentwood estate by authorities. Not in cuffs. Not yet. But with a look on her face that chilled even the officers who held the door. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She smiled. The kind of smile that only makes sense after the truth is too late. This story is not about Hollywood. It's not about movie sets, red carpets, or the glimmering life we thought the Reiner family lived. This story is about shadows, about blood, about betrayal wrapped in family dinners and polite smiles. And at the center of it all, Tracy Reiner. You know the name. Maybe you've heard of her as the daughter of Penny Marshall or the woman who starred in films like A League of Their Own. Maybe you know her as the adopted daughter of Rob Reiner, the beloved director of When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, and Stand By Me. But what if I told you she wasn't just a Hollywood figure? What if I told you she's now the prime suspect in a double homicide, one that left Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle dead, stabbed in their own home? And what if I told you that the one who exposed her wasn't a stranger, but her own niece, Romy? Let that sink in. A daughter accused, a son arrested, a father murdered, and a family torn apart by a truth too dark for the silver screen. But how did it come to this? Let's go back. Not years, just days. Sunday, December 14th. A $13.5 million estate nestled in Brentwood, Los Angeles. The Reiner home. Spacious. Private. Secure. At least, that's what they thought. Around 10:47 p.m., a desperate 911 call lit up the Los Angeles Police Department system. A woman's voice, panicked, broken, and trembling. They're not breathing. There's so much blood. Please, send someone. And hurry. That voice belonged to Romy Reiner, the youngest of Rob's children. And that call marked the beginning of the darkest chapter in the Reiner legacy. Let's talk about Rob Reiner for a moment. Not the celebrity, the man. Rob was 78. A father. A husband. A man who dedicated his later years not to the glitz of Hollywood, but to raising his children and enjoying the quiet that success affords the lucky few. He was known to his family as a jokester, a deep thinker, a man who laughed with his whole body and cried when no one was watching. And then, in one night, he and Michelle were gone. Violently. Without warning. Autopsy confirmed it, multiple sharp force injuries. No mercy. No chance. It wasn't a burglary. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was personal. The kind of wounds that say, I want you to suffer. But here's where the story takes its first turn. Rob and Michelle weren't alone that night. Their son, Nick Reiner, age 32, lived on the property. In the guest house. Nick, a name that's trailed headlines for years. Not because of fame, but because of demons. Addiction. Rehab. Relapses. Hospitalizations. A lifetime of pain behind Hollywood gates. He was the easy suspect. The troubled son. The black sheep. Police didn't hesitate. They found him near the scene. Disoriented. Shirt stained red. Eyes swollen from crying, or something darker. They arrested him before the sun came up. 2 counts of first-degree murder. It seemed open and shut. Too open. Too shut. But there was one problem. Romy didn't believe it. Here's what insiders claim Romy told police privately just hours after the arrest. He didn't do this alone. Someone else was here. Someone more dangerous. You need to talk to her. You need to talk to Tracy. At first, officers were skeptical. The case looked done. Then came the voicemail. A strange, cryptic message left by Tracy Reiner just 2 days before the murders. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't loud. It was worse. Cold. Calculated. A voice that spoke in riddles. I warn them, but they don't listen. I'll make sure the legacy is preserved, one way or another. Who was she talking about? Was it some harmless family feud? Or was this a veiled threat? When detectives listened to that message, something shifted. And when Romy revealed what she found hidden in her father's desk drawer, the case cracked wide open. But we'll get to that. First, you need to understand who Tracy Reiner really is. To the world, she was a Hollywood child raised by 2 icons. Penny Marshall's daughter, Rob Reiner's stepchild, later adopted and embraced. But behind closed doors, according to multiple insiders, Tracy always had a need for control, a hunger to be seen, not just as a daughter, but as the daughter, the successor, the protector of the family image. Some said she was the fixer. Others said she was the puppet master. And Nick? The perfect pawn. You might be wondering, why would she do it? Why would someone who seemed to have it all, wealth, connections, a legacy, destroy the very family that gave her everything? That question haunted Romy until the night she opened the safe in Rob's office. She wasn't supposed to be in there, but grief makes people bold. Inside, a single envelope. On the front, for Romy, if anything ever happens to me. Inside, a letter that would make her question everything she thought she knew about Aunt Tracy. But we'll break that letter down line by line in Chapter 5. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Right now, what you need to know is this. Romy took that letter straight to the police. And within 12 hours, the case flipped. Nick was no longer the sole focus. Tracy Reiner, beloved actress, trusted daughter, became suspect number one. Not just an accomplice, not just someone who knew too much, but the mastermind. This is the story of how a legacy was destroyed from the inside. It's about power, secrets, and the sickening weight of a perfect image. Because what if everything we knew about Rob Reiner's family was a lie? What if the real danger wasn't the troubled son, but the trusted daughter? What if Romy's heartbreaking revelation wasn't just a twist, but the key to everything? And most terrifying of all, what if Tracy was never working alone? We'll take you into the guest house, the voicemail, the will, the surveillance tapes, the autopsy findings, and the psychological evaluations, all of it. Because the deeper we dig, the more disturbing it becomes. This isn't just a family murder. It's a carefully orchestrated execution. And Tracy? She may have written the final scene before anyone else even knew they were in the script. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What does it feel like to walk into a room and realize your entire world has just been destroyed? That's the question Romy Reiner will likely ask herself for the rest of her life. The night of Sunday, December 14th, began like any other quiet evening in Brentwood, a wealthy neighborhood where the stars sleep behind locked gates and well-pruned hedges. The Reiners' $13.5 million estate was tucked away in a cul-de-sac, barely visible from the street. Nothing suggested that the walls inside that home would soon be soaked in tragedy. But what really happened that night? What caused a quiet Sunday to become the most horrifying moment in Reiner family history? And more importantly, who wanted it to happen? 10:04 p.m., surveillance picks up movement from the Reiner kitchen window. Light flickers. Someone walks across the hallway. 10:12 p.m., a figure, presumed to be Rob, steps outside briefly onto the patio. Smokes half a cigar. Unusual, given his heart issues. Was he anxious? Did he sense something? 10:18 p.m., guest house lights flick on. Nick Reiner is seen pacing, hands moving wildly. He's alone. Or is he? That's where things start to get strange. Because at 10:27 p.m., a second figure briefly appears near the backyard side gate. Their head is covered. No face. Just a shadow. And from that moment, everything accelerates. According to the coroner's report, Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were attacked sometime between 10:35 and 10:45 p.m. 10 minutes. That's all it took to end a love story that had lasted decades. But let's rewind. Romy had been texting her mother earlier that evening. Light conversation. Something about dinner reservations the following week. Nothing strange. Until 10:48 p.m. That's when Romy got a call from her father's cell. Except it wasn't his voice. There was no voice at all. Just muffled breathing. The sound of something heavy being dragged. Then the call disconnected. Romy, who lived just 15 minutes away, didn't hesitate. She got in her car. Drove like her life depended on it. Because maybe, deep down, she already knew. What would you do? If your parents lived in a mansion with cameras and guards and alarms, but your gut screamed something was terribly wrong? Romy arrived at 11:09 p.m. She used the family code to enter the gate. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. But as soon as she stepped into the main hallway, she froze. Blood. So much blood. The official crime scene log, later obtained by reporters, recorded Romy's words upon entering the house. For words. Chilling. Broken. Final. They're not breathing. Help. She made the 911 call at 11:11 p.m. The dispatcher's transcript reads like something out of a nightmare. Romy sobbing. Saying her dad's face was wrong. Saying her mom's hand was stretched toward the hallway, as if she had tried to reach for something, or someone. And then, silence. until Romy added one last sentence before sirens arrived. He's still here. I think Nick is still here. When LAPD officers arrived at 11:19 p.m., they found Rob and Michelle Reiner in the downstairs den. Rob was slumped on the couch. Michelle was half-seated on the floor, one hand gripping the edge of the glass coffee table. Both had suffered multiple stab wounds. No signs of forced entry. No shattered glass. No broken locks. Just violence, delivered fast, surgical, and silent. Nick Reiner was found minutes later in the guest house, curled into a fetal position on the floor. Shirt soaked in blood. Face swollen. Unresponsive. A knife was found under the couch in the main house. A second blade, smaller, almost like a paring knife, was later found in the laundry room. Both had traces of Rob and Michelle's blood. Only one had Nick's prints. So who used the second weapon? That's the question that would haunt detectives for days. Let's pause for a moment, because here's where the narrative gets twisted. Nick Reiner, the troubled son, had a history. Everyone knew it. He battled substance abuse. He'd written about it. He'd spoken about it. He even once said in an interview, "There were years where I hated myself. I couldn't even look at my dad without seeing disappointment." But murder? That was something else entirely. And yet, the LAPD had what they believed to be enough for an arrest. Blood on Nick's shirt. Surveillance of him entering the main house. No alibi. At 1:17 a.m., Nick Reiner was officially arrested on 2 counts of first-degree murder. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just cried. But here's the crack in the glass. When Romy was asked for a statement later that morning, she didn't say what everyone expected. She didn't blame Nick. She didn't scream for justice. She whispered something to the lead detective that would change the course of the investigation. Nick didn't do this alone. When pressed, she reportedly added, "You need to talk to Tracy." And that was the moment when the story went from tragic to terrifying. Tracy Reiner was not at the estate that night. At least, not according to her. She said she had been at a dinner party with friends in West Hollywood. She had texts, photos, even a receipt from a restaurant. But something didn't sit right. Not with Romy. Not with the detectives. Especially after Romy showed them a voicemail Tracy had left her 2 days earlier. It was cryptic. Almost poetic. They don't listen. But they will. Sometimes you have to break something to preserve what's left of it. What did that mean? Who wasn't listening? And what was Tracy trying to preserve? When the detectives tried to retrieve the voicemail from Romy's phone backup, they found something strange. It was gone. Deleted remotely. But how? Only someone with access to Romy's cloud account, or someone who knew the system. Who would go through that much trouble to erase a message unless it said something damning? And here's the kicker. Romy hadn't deleted it, but someone using a device signed in under her account had, while she was still giving her statement. The window of deletion? Between 2:03 and 2:04 a.m. Guess who had access? Tracy. It was now bigger than a family dispute. It was now a manhunt for the truth. Detectives began digging. They rewatched the guest house footage. Enhanced shadows. Isolated footsteps. Reanalyzed angles. At 10:29 p.m., exactly 4 minutes before the assumed time of death, a figure moved behind the garden shed. A female silhouette. Not Romy. Not Michelle. Not someone identified. And when officers cross-referenced Tracy's height, gait, and recent clothing choices, there was a match. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. They needed something undeniable. Something like fingerprints. Something like DNA. Or something like a motive. Tracy Reiner, as it turns out, had plenty of reasons to feel backed into a corner. According to documents later leaked by a source close to the investigation, Rob and Michelle had recently updated their will. They'd made changes. Significant ones. And those changes? They excluded Tracy from key inheritance clauses. The couple, reportedly, wanted to simplify their estate, focusing solely on biological children and trusts. It was legal, but it was personal. To Tracy, it felt like a declaration, a statement that, after all these years, she wasn't truly part of the family. And just days later, Rob and Michelle were dead. Coincidence? Or cold, calculated revenge? Police now had motive. They had a suspicious voicemail, a mystery second weapon, deleted evidence, a shadow on surveillance. But they still didn't have enough to charge Tracy. They needed more. And they'd get it. Soon. Because just hours after Nick's arrest, a detective opened Rob Reiner's private study to search for financial records. Instead, they found something else. Something in a sealed envelope. Something addressed to Romy. And inside was a message that would turn the entire case upside down. But what that letter said wouldn't be revealed to the public for another 72 hours. When it did, jaws dropped. Because it proved one thing beyond all doubt. Rob Reiner had seen it coming. What if the one everyone blamed was the only one who'd been manipulated all along? From the moment Nick Reiner was arrested, the public had its villain. A troubled son. A black sheep. The drug addict who never quite fit the mold. It was easy to point the finger. Easy to say, we saw this coming. But what if the clues we thought were red flags were actually decoys? What if Nick wasn't the architect of this tragedy, but just another piece on someone else's chessboard? Nick Reiner was born into fame, but not the kind you envy, not really. His father, Rob Reiner, was Hollywood royalty. Director, activist, comedian, loved, admired, feared. His mother, Michelle Singer, was known for her poise, grace, and intellect. The family was tight-lipped about personal matters, and even tighter when it came to Nick. And there's a reason for that. Because from an early age, Nick was different. Not in a dramatic way. Not at first. Quiet. Withdrawn. Observant. Some called him brilliant. Others said he was just sensitive. But something began to crack in his teenage years. By 15, Nick was experimenting with pills. By 17, he was admitted to his first rehab facility. And by 19, he'd overdosed twice. Rob Reiner tried everything. Private therapists, elite clinics, spiritual healers. He once paused a major film project just to attend a full-time family treatment program with Nick in Arizona. Most fathers would have walked away. Rob didn't. But nothing stuck. Nothing healed whatever was eating Nick alive. Then came the book. In his 20s, Nick co-authored a semi-autobiographical novel titled The Truth About Addiction. It was raw, messy, painful. In one chapter, he wrote, "Sometimes I dream I'm screaming in the middle of a family dinner. But no one hears me. They just keep eating." And in another, "The worst feeling is not being hated. It's being tolerated." People assumed he was being dramatic. Now, those passages read like premonitions. Let's zoom in on the year before the murders. Nick had moved into the guest house on his parents' Brentwood estate. It was supposed to be temporary. A place to stabilize, reset, and rebuild trust. He'd been sober for 6 months. He was seeing a therapist. He was even working on a second book. But insiders, including a former housekeeper who later gave an anonymous interview, claimed that things weren't as calm as they seemed. "There were nights I'd hear yelling," she said. "Not from Nick, from her." "Who's her?" "Tracy." "Yes, Tracy Reiner. The woman now suspected of masterminding the entire thing. Apparently, she visited often, sometimes unannounced, sometimes for hours at a time. And each time she left, Nick was worse. Withdrawn. Tense. One house staffer described it like this. He'd come out of those talks looking like he'd aged 5 years. It gets stranger. In late September, Nick reportedly left a voice memo on his phone. A rambling, paranoid stream of thoughts. Police later recovered fragments of it from his iCloud. "She's planting ideas in me. She keeps saying they don't respect me, that they never did, that they're trying to erase me from the family. And I think I believe her." What does that sound like to you? Mental instability? Or the early signs of grooming? Let's keep going. October 2024. Nick's sobriety reportedly breaks. He doesn't tell anyone. Not his parents. Not his therapist. But Tracy? Tracy knew. Because just 3 days after the relapse, Tracy allegedly texted Nick, "You slipped. It's okay. They'll blame you anyway. So why even try? Why would someone send that to a recovering addict? Why tell them they're already guilty? Unless you're trying to plant something. Twist the narrative. Build the perfect fall guy." By November, things worsened. Nick stopped attending therapy. He refused to eat dinner with the family. He began sleeping all day, pacing at night. The guest house security cameras show erratic behavior. He'd leave at 2 a.m., walk in circles in the backyard, and talk to himself under his breath. One night, he stared directly into the camera and whispered, "Do you see me now?" But the most disturbing moment? December 5th, 9 days before the murders. Security footage shows Tracy arriving at the guest house. No prior call. No announcement. She stays inside for 4 hours. At one point, Nick storms out, shirtless, barefoot, shouting. His voice is inaudible, but he collapses in the grass. Tracy doesn't follow him out. She leaves 20 minutes later, composed. Calm. Nick, on the other hand, doesn't move from the yard for over an hour. Why? What was said? What could be said to a man already on the edge that would break him that completely? Now, here's where it gets even darker. In the days following that visit, Nick reportedly began writing what police have referred to as a red notebook. It hasn't been fully released to the public. Not yet. But sources close to the investigation say it contains pages and pages of emotionally unstable thoughts. Scattered entries. One line repeated multiple times. If I do this, will she finally see me? Another. She said it would be justice. Over and over again. Mentions of her. Never a name. Just she. But everyone close to Nick believes they know who she was. And now, so do the detectives. Fast forward to December 12th. Just 48 hours before the murder. Nick sends a group text to his family. It reads, I've made a mess of things. I'm sorry. I love you all. I hope one day someone understands. That same night, Tracy calls Nick 3 times in a row. Then she sends a final message. No turning back now. You know what they think of you. And then, silence. Until 2 nights later. When blood spilled on hardwood floors. So what does this all mean? Was Nick broken? Absolutely. Was he dangerous? Maybe. But was he acting alone? Let's look at what the FBI profiler said during the early stages of the case. The wounds indicate strategic placement. The use of 2 weapons suggests a coordinated effort. The psychological profile of Nick suggests impulsivity, not orchestration. He's volatile, yes, but this crime was surgical, calculated. Someone else was involved. In plain English, Nick may have held the knife, but someone else handed it to him. Mentally, emotionally. And if that's true, who was the real killer? The tragedy of Nick Reiner isn't just that he may have been manipulated into committing an unthinkable crime. It's that no one listened when he cried for help. Not when he was 15. Not when he was 20. Not even when he was curled on a jail cell floor, muttering the same word over and over again. Tracy. That's right. Multiple jail staff members have now confirmed that in the hours after his arrest, Nick kept whispering her name. Tracy. 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 Almost like a chant, or a confession, or a warning. And when Romy heard that, she knew what she had to do. She opened her father's study, cracked the code on the old lockbox, and found the envelope that Rob Reiner had left behind. An envelope that contained a letter. And in that letter, Rob revealed exactly what he feared, and who he believed was about to destroy the family. But what came next would take everything we thought we knew and flip it upside down. What happens when the person you call family turns out to be the one orchestrating your destruction? To the world, Tracy Reiner was the quiet force in the Reiner family, composed, thoughtful, the one who avoided the headlines and scandals that often clung to the children of Hollywood royalty. But behind the silence was a storm. And for years, no one noticed it building. Because Tracy didn't shout. She waited. And when she finally moved, she struck with precision. But let's rewind. Let's start at the beginning. Because to understand why Tracy Reiner may have murdered her own adoptive father, you need to understand who she really was. Tracy was born in 1964 to actress Penny Marshall and was later adopted by Rob Reiner after he married Penny. That might sound simple. A loving Hollywood stepfather welcoming a child into his life. But the truth was far more complicated. Growing up, Tracy was always caught between 2 worlds. The shadow of her biological lineage, being the daughter of Penny Marshall, niece of director Gary Marshall. The high expectations of the Reiner name, a legacy of progressive values, creative genius, and public admiration. Tracy didn't quite fit in either. She wasn't as famous. She wasn't as charming. She wasn't Reiner enough. That's not our opinion. Those are the words she once reportedly said to a close friend during a party in the early 2000s. I've been in their family all my life, but I've never really been in it. Let that sink in. Years of smiling in family photos, Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas cards, but always on the outside. Not the real daughter, not the favorite. And over time, that sense of exclusion twisted. Those close to Tracy say she was always poised. Never loud, never dramatic. But she had an intense gaze, a calculating silence, the kind of energy that made people lower their voices around her without knowing why. A former family assistant described her as a chess player in a room full of checkers, and she always had a particularly strong grip over Nick. ever since he was little. Now here's something you didn't know. When Nick was going through his worst battles with addiction, it wasn't Rob who handled his interventions. It wasn't even Michelle. It was Tracy. She would show up, no matter the hour. She'd sit next to him during detox. She'd make the calls. She'd even threaten rehab directors when they said Nick wasn't ready for discharge. At first, it seemed like compassion. But looking back, some say it was conditioning. Because Tracy wasn't just there to support Nick. She was there to control him. Romy once confided in a friend, months before the murder, that she felt Tracy had a strange hold on Nick. She said Nick would act differently around her. Submissive, nervous, eager to please. He'd be 3 years sober and she'd say one sentence, and he'd start shaking. Romy reportedly told her friend. What kind of bond creates that level of fear? What kind of power makes a grown man regress like that? And why was Tracy so obsessed with protecting Nick, while pushing Romy to the margins? Because yes, that happened too. While she embraced Nick, Tracy often dismissed Romy. Sometimes subtly, sometimes coldly. One family friend recalled a Reiner gathering where Romy expressed interest in following in her father's filmmaking footsteps. Tracy's response: "It's cute when people want to be like their parents. But not everyone gets to wear the crown." No one laughed, especially not Rob. But even then, no one challenged her. Let's talk about Rob and Tracy's relationship. Publicly, they were close. But privately, it began to deteriorate over the past 5 years. After Penny Marshall passed away in 2018, Tracy changed. She became more protective, more isolated, more suspicious of outsiders. But in Tracy's world, outsiders included almost everyone. Even Rob. Especially Rob. According to a therapist Rob was seeing, whose notes were later subpoenaed, Rob began expressing concern about Tracy in early 2023. One entry read, "Tracy's visits are becoming more intense. She's questioning our finances, our estate plans. She keeps saying, 'You don't know what you're doing.'" Another note, "She told Michelle last week, 'If you cut me out, you'll regret it. I swear to God, you'll regret it.'" Those aren't the words of a loving daughter. Those are warnings. Veiled threats. And they weren't just verbal. Multiple sources close to the family say that Tracy began a quiet campaign in 2024 to position herself as the executor of Rob's estate. She met with lawyers, not Rob's, but her own. She began researching inheritance loopholes. She even pushed for Rob to be placed under a family trust that she controlled. When that didn't happen, she reportedly lashed out. In one email, obtained by investigators, Tracy wrote to a lawyer, "If he dies with the current setup, everything gets wasted. I'm the only one who knows what he would have wanted." That email was sent just 6 weeks before the murders. So now, let's piece this together. Tracy was furious about being cut out of Rob and Michelle's updated will. She had growing resentment toward Romy. She maintained manipulative influence over Nick. And she saw herself as the guardian of the true Reiner legacy, the part that she believed was being erased. This isn't theory. This is motive. And it gets worse. 2 days after the murders, Tracy met with detectives voluntarily. Calm. Cooperative. She said she'd been at a dinner party in West Hollywood with several friends. She had proof, text messages, selfies, receipts. But one of the friends she listed as an alibi told police they hadn't seen her all night. Another claimed she was with Tracy for only part of the evening, and that Tracy left early to deal with a family emergency. There was no emergency, unless Tracy created one. And remember that chilling voicemail? The one Romy played for police? They don't listen, but they will. Sometimes you have to break something to preserve what's left of it. The detectives analyzed the tone, the rhythm, the timing. One linguistics expert said it sounded rehearsed. Pre-written, planned, like a script. Who writes scripts for a living? Who spent her entire life directing emotion from behind the scenes? Exactly. Now here's a kicker that'll make your blood run cold. 3 years ago, Tracy was invited to speak at a small industry panel. The topic? Character development in crime thrillers. And during her talk, she said this: "The perfect villain is the one no one suspects. The one closest to the hero. The one who's always been there, planning quietly." Let that echo for a moment. Let it sink in. Because 3 years later, that very quote would be printed on the wall of a homicide division, right under Tracy Reiner's name. So why didn't anyone stop her? Because manipulation is slow. It's subtle. It's surgical. Tracy didn't break into the family. She blended in. She became indispensable. She played the role of protector, of mother, of fixer. But now, the mask is slipping. And beneath it is someone darker, sharper, colder. And what Romy finds next, in the letter her father left behind, will confirm what she feared all along. That Tracy wasn't just planning something. She was executing it. And no one was safe. What if a single message, just seconds long, was enough to unravel a perfect alibi? Because that's exactly what happened next. Up until this point, everything surrounding Tracy Reiner could still be explained away. Coincidences, family tension, misunderstandings, a grieving niece pointing fingers in shock. That's what Tracy's attorneys would later argue. But then there was the voicemail. And once investigators heard it, this case stopped being about what might have happened and started becoming about what had been planned. Let's reset the moment. It's Tuesday morning, 2 days after Rob and Michelle Reiner were found dead. Romy has barely slept. She's still wearing the same sweater she had on the night of the murders. Her phone hasn't stopped buzzing. Reporters, extended family, friends she hasn't spoken to in years. She ignores all of them. Instead, she walks into the homicide division with one thing on her mind: her phone. She asks to speak to the lead detective alone. No lawyers, no PR people, just her. And then she says something that instantly shifts the room. There's a message, she tells them, from Tracy, and it doesn't make sense unless you hear it. She presses play. The voicemail lasts 37 seconds. Tracy's voice is calm, controlled, almost soothing. But the words? They don't sound like someone venting. They sound like someone closing a chapter. I tried to warn them, over and over. They don't listen. They never do. But they will now. Sometimes you have to break something to preserve what's left of it. You'll understand soon. Silence. No signature. No call me back. No explanation. Just that. The room goes quiet. One detective reportedly asked the obvious question. Warn them about what? Romy's answer? I don't know. And that's what scares me. At first glance, the message is vague enough to be brushed off. Family drama. Metaphors. Someone feeling excluded. But detectives don't listen to what is said first. They listen to how it's said. And this voicemail didn't sound emotional. It sounded rehearsed, measured, almost satisfied. One investigator later described it like this. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a curtain call. Here's where it gets disturbing. When detectives asked Romy to forward the voicemail to their system, something strange happened. The file wouldn't send. The voicemail, which Romy had listened to dozens of times, suddenly showed as deleted. Not moved to trash. Deleted entirely. Romy panicked. She insisted she hadn't touched it. And she was telling the truth. Because when tech analysts checked the server logs, they found something that made everyone's stomach drop. The voicemail had been remotely deleted from Romy's cloud account at 2:03 a.m., while Romy was sitting inside the police station, giving her statement. Who deletes evidence from someone else's account in real time? Unless they know it's dangerous? Unless they know exactly what it could prove? And unless they have access. That's when detectives widen the scope. They pulled access logs, checked linked devices, cross-referenced IP addresses. And guess what they found? A login from a device registered to Tracy Reiner's email, used to access Romy's cloud account. The login location? A hotel in West Hollywood. The same hotel Tracy claimed she stayed at the night of the murders. The alibi suddenly didn't feel so solid. But the voicemail wasn't gone forever. Because Romy had done something instinctively smart. She had recorded it, not forwarded it, not backed it up to the cloud. She'd used another phone, her old one, and recorded Tracy's message while it played out loud. Old school, analog. And because of that, investigators still had it. Clear as day. And now they could analyze it. They sent the audio to a forensic linguistics expert. Someone trained to detect intent, deception, and emotional cues in speech. The findings were unsettling. According to the report, Tracy's tone showed no signs of distress. Her breathing was steady. Her pacing was intentional. Key phrases were emphasized unnaturally, suggesting rehearsal. One line stood out. Sometimes you have to break something to preserve what's left of it. The expert wrote, "This is not the language of regret. It is the language of justification." Justification. That word would come up again. Investigators then did something even more revealing. They compared the voicemail to past recordings of Tracy speaking publicly. Interviews, panels, old film clips. The rhythm matched. The pauses matched. Even the emphasis pattern, how she lingered on certain words, matched moments when Tracy talked about control, legacy, and narrative. It was as if she was explaining a story, not confessing, explaining. Now here's the twist most people missed. The voicemail wasn't sent to Nick. It wasn't sent to Rob. It wasn't sent to Michelle. It was sent to Romy. Why Romy? Why not the parents she claimed weren't listening? Why send it to the one person who might question everything? Unless Tracy wanted Romy to hear it. Unless the message wasn't a warning, but a breadcrumb. Something designed to be found after the fact. Almost like Tracy wanted someone to understand. Or at least, to know she had a reason. That's not the mindset of someone acting in rage. That's the mindset of someone acting with purpose. At this point, detectives re-interview Tracy. This time, the tone is different. They don't accuse her outright. They ask about the voicemail. Tracy doesn't deny it. She smiles slightly and says, "I was emotional." Then they ask her why it was deleted remotely from Romy's account. Her answer? "I didn't want her to misunderstand." That answer alone raised eyebrows. Because if the message was innocent, why erase it? And if it was misunderstood, why not explain it? Why erase it in secret? But the most chilling moment came when a detective asked Tracy a simple question. "When did you last speak to Rob?" Tracy paused, just for a second. Then she said, 2 weeks ago. But phone records showed something else. They showed a call. A long one. 17 minutes. At 10:21 p.m. on the night of the murders. Just minutes before the estimated time of death. When confronted with this, Tracy's face reportedly changed. Not anger. Not fear. Annoyance. As if she'd been caught forgetting a line in a script. She then claimed Rob had accidentally called her and hung up. But investigators knew better. Because voicemail metadata showed the call had been answered. And someone spoke. Quietly. This is where Romy's role becomes even more important. Because Romy remembered something. Something she hadn't thought mattered. A conversation from weeks earlier. Tracy had said casually, "If anything ever happens, remember, context is everything." At the time, Romy thought it was odd. Now, it felt like a warning. Or worse, a rehearsal. The voicemail became the turning point. Not because it proved Tracy committed murder, but because it proved something just as dangerous. That she knew something was coming. That she framed it in advance. That she spoke like someone who believed the ending was inevitable. And when detectives placed the voicemail alongside the will changes, the surveillance shadows, Nick's deteriorating mental state, and the deleted evidence, a pattern emerged. Not chaos. Not impulse. Design. And the next thing investigators uncovered would make that design impossible to deny. Because hidden inside Rob Reiner's private office was a document that spelled everything out. A document Rob had written himself. A document he'd hidden for Romy. A document that began with 5 words. "If you're reading this." But what came next would change the entire case. And once it was revealed, there was no going back. What if the victim saw his death coming and left behind one final warning? That's exactly what happened when Romy Reiner opened the bottom drawer of her father's antique desk. The one with the brass handle no one ever used. The one Rob had always locked with a tiny, odd-shaped key he never left lying around. And yet, after the murders, the key appeared. Right in front of the family photo on Rob's bookshelf. Like someone wanted her to find it. And when she did, she found the document that would blow the case wide open. Not just because of what it said, but because of who it named. Let's rewind. The Reiners' Brentwood estate had a private office tucked away in the far left corner of the house. A place Rob called his fortress. Bookshelves wall to wall. Heavy leather chair. Framed photos of actors, scripts, political memorabilia. It was the one space untouched by modern design trends. No Wi-Fi. No fingerprint locks. Just paper, files, memories, and secrets. After the murders, police cordoned off every room, except the office. Why? Because it was locked. Solid. Untouched. No signs of disturbance. As if the killer never even went inside. But Romy knew better. She knew that her father, a meticulous man by every definition, would never have left things just so if something had been bothering him. And something had definitely been bothering him. So, the morning after Tracy's voicemail had been played for police, Romy did something bold. She went home, slipped past the officers, found the key, and opened the desk drawer. What she found? An envelope. Thick. sealed, written in Rob's unmistakable handwriting. For Romy, if anything ever happens to me. Inside were two things. A handwritten letter, 4 pages, front and back. A notarized document dated November 8th, 2024. Just 5 weeks before his death. Let's start with the letter, because what Rob wrote in that letter would shake Romy to her core. The first line read, "Romy, if you're holding this, then I'm either dead, or something so terrible has happened that I couldn't stay silent anymore." The pages that followed read like a confession, not of guilt, but of fear. Rob Reiner wasn't just a director or activist. He was a man who had learned to read people with surgical accuracy. And in the letter, he admitted something he had never said aloud, that for the past year, he'd been watching Tracy closely, with increasing concern. Here are just a few passages from the letter, as later cited in a court affidavit. "She visits Nick more than she visits us. And every time she leaves, he's more fragile than before. Michelle is afraid to confront her. I don't blame her. Tracy has a coldness in her now I don't recognize. She brought up the will again. This time, not just upset, angry. She said if I didn't do the right thing, others would. There are things I haven't told anyone, Romy, but I need you to know this. If something happens to me and your mother, Tracy must be questioned. She's smart, too smart, and she's patient. But the most devastating line, the one Romy reportedly whispered aloud in the station while holding the letter, was this: I fear she sees us not as family, but as obstacles." Now let's talk about the second document, a notarized statement, prepared by Rob's personal attorney, that formally updated the Reiner estate's distribution. In it, Rob and Michelle outlined major changes. Romy was to receive control of all intellectual property rights. Nick's portion was to be placed in a supervised trust until he reached 40 and remained sober for 5 consecutive years. Tracy Reiner? Removed entirely. The document read, MS. Reiner has demonstrated behavior and attitudes inconsistent with the family's values and well-being. Her continued access to estate resources is no longer in the family's best interest. This wasn't just legal. This was personal. Rob had effectively excommunicated Tracy from his legacy. And she knew, because just days after this will was signed, according to an email recovered by police, Tracy messaged an old colleague. It's a shame they don't realize the consequences of betrayal. Some things are unforgivable. So now the pieces were falling into place. Rob feared Tracy. Michelle was reportedly walking on eggshells around her. Romy had been marginalized. Nick had been emotionally manipulated. And then, 2 people ended up dead. 1 arrested, 1 accused, and 1, Tracy, walking free. Until this letter surfaced and gave police something they couldn't ignore: intent. The discovery of this document changed the case in 3 critical ways. Motive was now written in the victim's own hand. No longer theory, it was a documented, time-stamped fear. Tracy's potential influence over Nick was spelled out. Rob had suspected it. He'd seen the deterioration. The new will completely cut Tracy out. If money was involved, it was now inescapably clear that Tracy had lost everything. Except one thing: the opportunity to take it all back. By force. But the document also posed new questions, because Rob hinted at something more. In the final paragraph of the letter, he wrote, "There's a file in the green box under the bottom shelf. If things escalate, you'll understand. I couldn't bring myself to tell you in person." That file was found the next morning. Inside, photos, surveillance printouts, and most shocking of all, a handwritten journal entry from Nick, one Rob had secretly copied. It read, "She says they'll forget me anyway. But she won't. She promised to make it right. I don't want to hurt them, but she says it's the only way." A direct reference to Tracy. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. This was premeditation. The moment police read the documents, they returned to Tracy's hotel. But she was gone. Checked out hours earlier. No forwarding address. No calls. No texts. Disappeared. She had vanished into the night, as if she'd been waiting for the exact moment the evidence surfaced. And Romy? She was no longer the grieving daughter. She became the case's key witness, the protector of her father's final truth. But what Tracy did next, in her final days on the run, would send shockwaves across the country. Because she didn't just vanish. She responded. And the way she did it would shake Romy to her core and leave detectives stunned. What if the key to the murder was hiding in the shadows? and someone had already tried to erase it. By this point in the investigation, Tracy Reiner was no longer just a suspect. She was a ghost, a shadow that had slipped away hours before Rob Reiner's final letter was handed over to detectives. A woman whose last known digital footprint was a mysterious login to Romy's cloud account. And just like that, she was gone. But the truth? It wasn't gone. Because in the backyard of the Brentwood estate, mounted just above a weathered cedar shed, was a tiny, often forgotten camera, old, outdated, and largely ignored. Until now. And what that camera captured? It cracked everything wide open. Let's talk about the garden shed. It wasn't just for shovels and lawn tools. This shed was part of the original estate, built decades earlier. Rob Reiner had once joked that it held more secrets than the average Hollywood agent. Inside were old movie props, handwritten scripts, even dusty boxes from his All in the Family days. But behind the shed, where no one ever went, where the grass grew just a little too long, was a gravel path connecting the guest house and the back patio of the main home. Most of the estate was covered by top-of-the-line security cameras. But that corner? That was a blind spot. At least, that's what everyone thought. Until one tech-savvy officer decided to pull footage from the shed's old analog security cam, the one installed years earlier by Rob himself when he'd grown paranoid after a strange fan encounter. No one had checked it. It wasn't connected to the main home system. It had its own storage, a tiny drive tucked in a steel lockbox beneath the floorboards. They retrieved it, downloaded the footage, and when they pressed play on the night of December 14th, their jaws dropped. The footage began harmlessly. 10:02 p.m., Rob stepping out onto the back patio, cigar in hand. He looks pensive, stares at the stars. 10:09 p.m., a motion blur behind the garden shed. Fast, low, could have been an animal. But then, 10:29 p.m., a tall figure appears on the path, wearing black, hood up, not walking, creeping. The figure pauses, just beneath the camera's reach, but a single movement gives everything away. A gloved hand brushing back a strand of hair. And even in the grainy footage, you could tell it was a woman. Detectives zoomed in, frame by frame. The figure turns ever so slightly, revealing part of a profile. And for just half a second, the camera catches it. The jawline, the arched brow, the scar above the left eyebrow, the one Tracy had gotten during a bicycle accident in 1994. Romy later confirmed it. There was no denying it. It was Tracy Reiner, and she was heading straight toward the main house. Now, here's where it gets even more disturbing. As Tracy moves past the shed toward the kitchen door, another figure steps out from the guest house. Nick, disoriented, shaky, he walks directly into the backyard. Tracy reaches him. They speak for roughly 27 seconds. No audio, just movement. Tracy places her hand on his shoulder, then on the side of his face. Nick nods, like he's accepting something. Then she gently guides him, not back to the guest house, but toward the main house. This wasn't rage. This wasn't chaos. This was orchestration. Detectives paused the footage there, because what came next wasn't on camera. That path led out of frame, toward the kitchen entrance. And 8 minutes later, Rob and Michelle were dead. But now, they had visual proof that Tracy was on the property. She met with Nick just before the murders. She led him into the main house. That wasn't suspicion anymore. That was involvement. Investigators released a redacted still image from the footage to the public. Just enough to confirm a suspect without violating privacy laws. But the response? Immediate. Over a dozen neighbors called in to say they remembered seeing a woman matching Tracy's description near the property that night. One neighbor, a dog walker named Lena, said she saw a woman in dark clothes leaving the estate around 11:15 p.m., walking briskly toward a parked black SUV. She thought it was odd, but didn't think to report it until she saw the news. Guess what? Tracy Reiner owned a black Escalade, registered in her name, and that SUV was no longer at her residence. But the real bombshell came when investigators enhanced the footage further. Because as Tracy passed under the low backyard light, something caught the glimmer. A chain around her neck, with a pendant, a small silver key. And Romy? She recognized it instantly. It was the key to Rob's desk drawer, the one where the "if anything happens" letter was hidden. Tracy had taken it, worn it, then returned it before anyone noticed. But why? Why were the key to something that could expose you? Unless you were daring someone to find it. Unless you believed they wouldn't. Unless you believed you were that untouchable. Now investigators were racing against time. Tracy had vanished. Nick was spiraling in custody, refusing to speak beyond murmured fragments. And Romy? She was beginning to remember things. Sudden moments. Things that hadn't seemed important. Like the time 2 months before the murder when Tracy had casually asked, "If you had to pick one of us to carry the legacy, who would it be? You or Nick?" At the time, Romy thought it was a weird question. Now, it felt like a test. Like Tracy had already chosen her player and was preparing the game. The garden shed footage made one thing clear. Tracy hadn't stumbled into this. She had been there. She had orchestrated the moment. She had watched it unfold. And then, she disappeared. But she didn't stay silent for long. Because just as investigators launched a statewide search for her, a letter arrived. Typed. No return address. Postmarked from Oregon. Inside, 3 words, centered on the page. Check the fireplace. What fireplace? Which house? And what did she leave behind? That message would lead detectives to the final piece of evidence. And it would be discovered where no one had dared look yet. In the very heart of the crime scene. What if someone knew they were being cut out of everything and decided to rewrite the ending by force? That's the dark truth investigators began to uncover when they traced every piece of paperwork, every legal transaction, and every whispered conversation in the weeks leading up to Rob and Michelle Reiner's murder. Because the deeper they looked into the estate documents, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about family drama. This was about power. And the one person who had the most to lose had already taken steps to take it back, one signature at a time. Let's start with the attorney. Rob Reiner was a meticulous man. Even in his late 70s, he was sharp, involved in every decision, and cautious when it came to finances. Over the years, he had worked with the same trusted estate attorney, Franklin Bellamy, a former tax prosecutor turned family office specialist. Bellamy had drawn up Rob's original will back in 2009, shortly after Romy turned 11. The will was generous. Each child, Nick, Romy, and Tracy, would receive equal shares of the estate. In addition, all 3 were listed as beneficiaries of Rob's intellectual property rights, royalties from the Princess Bride, This Is Spinal Tap, and more. It was a legacy, a dynasty. But something changed in mid-2024. Bellamy received a phone call. Not from Rob. Not from Michelle. From Tracy. She requested a meeting. Not to ask questions, but to demand answers. According to a memo Bellamy later turned over to investigators, Tracy said, "The structure doesn't make sense anymore. Rob's not in the right mind. He's letting the wrong people make decisions." Bellamy asked her to clarify. She reportedly snapped, "You know what I mean. Romy's manipulating him. She's trying to erase me from this family." The meeting ended in tension, and days later, Rob contacted Bellamy directly. His message? He wanted to make changes. Big ones. In November 2024, Rob and Michelle signed a new will. The revised document did 3 key things. Removed Tracy Reiner as a primary beneficiary. Transferred executor powers solely to Romy. Placed Nick's share into a contingency trust that would only activate if he remained sober for 5 uninterrupted years. Tracy was effectively cut out. Not just financially, but symbolically, legally, permanently. And here's where things get even more chilling. Bellamy told investigators that Tracy somehow found out about the updated will before it was officially filed. And no one, not Rob, not Michelle, not Bellamy himself, told her. So how did she know? The theory? She hacked into Rob's email. Or maybe she had someone on the inside. Either way, by November 18th, Bellamy received a legal inquiry from a Los Angeles attorney named Randall Briggs, a little-known estate lawyer with very specific ties. Guess who he represented? Tracy Reiner. The letter was aggressive. It claimed Rob was being coerced by third parties and demanded a hold be placed on any modifications to the estate until Tracy could be properly consulted. It even threatened to file a guardianship petition questioning Rob's mental capacity. Let that sink in. Tracy was threatening to declare Rob mentally incompetent just to keep her share of the estate. Bellamy didn't respond. He called Rob instead. According to phone records, the 2 men spoke for 42 minutes. And at the end of that call, Bellamy drafted a legal memo to protect himself. In it, he wrote, Client expressed full clarity of mind, acknowledged risk of family retaliation, confirmed he wishes to proceed with updated will regardless of fallout. That memo would later be used in court as proof that Rob Reiner knew exactly what he was doing. Now let's talk motive. Most people assume that when money is involved, greed is the motive. But this was deeper. Tracy didn't just want cash. She wanted recognition, control. She wanted to be the heir, not the extra. She believed, according to multiple emails recovered from her private server, that she had held the family together for decades while others played favorites. One email to a close friend, written just 3 days before the murders, read, "They think I'm replaceable, but I built everything around them. I protected their name. I protected Nick. If they erase me, they erase the truth." This wasn't about being disinherited. This was about being discarded. And Tracy had spent her life making sure that wouldn't happen. But here's the moment everything shifted. After receiving no response from Bellamy, Tracy hired another lawyer. This time, a quiet man named Ethan Crane, known for working behind the scenes in celebrity estate battles. Crane filed a draft motion in probate court on Tracy's behalf, challenging the fitness and legality of the updated Reiner estate plan. But guess what? Before the motion could be filed officially, Rob and Michelle were dead. Now here's the chilling timeline. November 20th, Rob signs the updated will. November 25th, Tracy hires Ethan Crane. December 2nd, Crane finalizes draft motion. December 14th, Rob and Michelle are murdered. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots. But there was still one hole in the case. Tracy wasn't a fool. She had legal buffers, alibis, paper trails. So, investigators turned their attention to a final piece of evidence, a suggestion that Tracy had planted someone inside the system, someone working at Bellamy's office, a paralegal named Elise M., who had previously interned for a friend of Tracy's. They pulled Elise's records, and guess what they found? Unusual logins to Bellamy's internal document archive on the same days Tracy's emails were sent, including one download titled Final Reiner Will 2024_signed.pdf. So Tracy knew. And more importantly, she knew exactly what she was about to lose, unless she did something drastic. This brings us back to the anonymous message mailed to detectives. Check the fireplace. Remember that? They returned to the Reiner home, specifically the master bedroom's fireplace. And hidden behind a loose stone in the mantel was a sealed envelope. Inside, 2 items, a flash drive, a typed and signed note. The note read, "If they find this, it's because she made the first move." I didn't want to believe it, but she said it straight to me. If I can't have your legacy, no one will. The flash drive contained audio from a phone call between Rob and Tracy. And in that call, she said it, clear as day, "You're not thinking clearly anymore. If you go through with this, you'll break the family. And when that happens, I won't be the one left behind." The tone? Not sad, not angry, threatening. That recording, stored without her knowledge, would become the centerpiece of the case. It proved intent. It showed knowledge of the will. And it revealed the depth of Tracy's rage. She didn't just lose her inheritance. She lost control. And the only way to get it back was to burn everything down. But just when it seemed like the case had reached its peak, that the motive had been nailed, the evidence secured, a surprise twist surfaced from an unexpected place. Nick Reiner's prison cell. A letter, written in pencil, smudged, torn. And it contained the words no one saw coming. She said it would be justice. I said yes. And now I can't stop seeing them. But what else did that letter reveal? And could it confirm Tracy's final role in orchestrating the murders? What if the one everyone blamed was the only one who'd been manipulated all along? From the moment Nick Reiner was arrested, the public had its villain. A troubled son. A black sheep. The drug addict who never quite fit the mold. It was easy to point the finger. Easy to say, "We saw this coming." But what if the clues we thought were red flags were actually decoys? What if Nick wasn't the architect of this tragedy, but just another piece on someone else's chessboard? Nick Reiner was born into fame, but not the kind you envy, not really. His father, Rob Reiner, was Hollywood royalty. Director, activist, comedian, loved, admired, feared. His mother, Michelle Singer, was known for her poise, grace, and intellect. The family was tight-lipped about personal matters, and even tighter when it came to Nick. And there's a reason for that. Because from an early age, Nick was different. Not in a dramatic way. Not at first. Quiet. Withdrawn. Observant. Some called him brilliant. Others said he was just sensitive. But something began to crack in his teenage years. By 15, Nick was experimenting with pills. By 17, he was admitted to his first rehab facility. And by 19, he'd overdosed twice. Rob Reiner tried everything. Private therapists, elite clinics, spiritual healers. He once paused a major film project just to attend a full-time family treatment program with Nick in Arizona. Most fathers would have walked away. Rob didn't. But nothing stuck. Nothing healed whatever was eating Nick alive. Then came the book. In his 20s, Nick co-authored a semi-autobiographical novel titled The Truth About Addiction. It was raw, messy, painful. In one chapter, he wrote, "Sometimes I dream I'm screaming in the middle of a family dinner. But no one hears me. They just keep eating." And in another, "The worst feeling is not being hated. It's being tolerated." People assumed he was being dramatic. Now, those passages read like premonitions. Let's zoom in on the year before the murders. Nick had moved into the guest house on his parents' Brentwood estate. It was supposed to be temporary.